What's going on, Adventure fam? It's another beautiful day in the neighborhood here at Point Noir, home of the Point Noir podcast. I'm your host. You know me by now, Jerry the Third, aka Kimono Jack, because I keep the kimonos on Deckington. Glad you guys are joining us for another awesome session here at Point Noir. It is session 15. We just out here chugging along. I listen back to the episodes sometimes and I'm like, damn, I be thanking people a lot for all the reviews and ratings and the messages and stuff. But real talk, it means a lot, and you guys have a million other things to do. So the fact that you'd even spend a moment going out to review on iTunes or sending me a message on Instagram, it means a lot because I know we all have busy lives. So keep that up. Keep rating, keep reviewing, keep subscribing. We appreciate it. It helps the show build momentum. And we're out here rolling, you know. Soon everybody's going to know what we got going on here. So without further delay, let's introduce today's awesome guest, and I'll see you on the other side. Joining us today at the Point is Mr. Chris Campbell, Esquire. And I want to make sure I emphasize the fact that he is a lawyer because I don't feel like I did that enough in the show. You can follow him on Instagram at teamlikethesoup. It is spelled just the way it sounds, and it will be in the show notes. So Chris and I have another interesting origin story. We first met as teammates and students at the University of South Carolina. We were both on the men's track and field team. We both took Chinese. We both started learning Chinese together. And it's just been amazing to watch his transition from being a student of the language to being a practitioner of the language to becoming a trained lawyer over there in China and here in the States. He's just had an incredible journey that has spanned the globe, and I'm so glad he could share his firsthand experience and perspective of being so deep in the Chinese culture. So I hope you guys are ready to learn about what's going on over there in China because it's a lot popping. Sit back, grab a refreshing beverage of choice, and get ready to enjoy today's session. Hey, Chris. So glad you could make it here with us. How are you feeling today, bro?
I'm feeling easy. Sunday afternoon.
Hey, man, love that energy, bro. I'm telling you, I could use it today, so definitely our listeners can use it. And I always get juiced up doing the show, but you're such a positive guy. We go a little bit ways back from college, man. I'm so glad we could spend a moment to actually catch up and record it.
Absolutely. I appreciate your offering to be on the show. And, you said way back in college, and man, it's hard to believe that was some years ago now. And I'm excited to catch up with you and chat with your fan base here.
Yeah, man, 100%. So let's get into it. Let's talk about a little bit of your origin stories as in terms of travel and adventure and some of your big trips. You know, I definitely know some sequences we could talk about, but I'd love to hear it from your narrative and your perspective.
Well, absolutely. One, I appreciate you, calling it an origin story. That makes me feel like I'm in Marvel or something.
Dude, you know that's how we live. We're all about this anime, this Marvel life, this cartoon stuff. Like, I know you all out. Chris and I actually used to be in Chinese class together in college for 2 semesters. And yeah, so we're about this cartoon life.
That's true. But to your point, that's actually where it all began. I guess when I was in middle school and high school, I always wanted to study abroad, but didn't know exactly, what that looked like and how that worked. And so, like Jerry mentioned, we were at the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks,
Hey.
at the Darla Moore School of Business. We were taking Chinese. And that's kind of where I got hooked, that, learning the Chinese language and the culture in a classroom is one thing, but having the opportunity to go and actually put that into practice is another. So in summer of 2010, I took my first trip to China, was in Beijing for a few months, and I was hooked. I knew I had to get back abroad, and that led to studies abroad in London and other parts of Europe, and then eventually living in Beijing for a couple of years and traveling across Asia. But let's start with that. That's my adventures in a nutshell. We'll kind of expound on that as we go through this.
100%. And I want to take it back just a little bit so we can kind of get the full context. Where are you from? Where were you raised? What sort of environment? Did you travel growing up? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I sure can. I am from the bustling metropolis of Irmo, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Which is just outside Columbia. If you hit Columbia and back up, you'll hit Irmo. But I was I was a Southerner raised by two Northerners. My parents are from New York and Philadelphia. My dad's from the Bronx and my mom's from West Philly near Drexel.
What? BX all day, East Coast, Beast Coast, Philly. I didn't know that about you, bro.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Don't let the Southern drawl from time to time fool you.
Yeah, Chris. What Chris is trying to say, run up, get done up. You know what I'm saying?
But yeah, so that's kind of my background. That's where I come from, in terms of, my parents and, where I grew up. And I spent most of my life in Colombia, until, I was 20 and went to China for the first time. But I spent a decent amount of time in New York, visiting family up there, growing up. So, I've been privileged to travel through that and travel through track and field. My illustrious clarinet career in high school, I got to travel the country doing that in high school.
Okay. And I mean, traveling up and down the East Coast, we were definitely on some of these trips together on the track and field team. I didn't mention this. We're going to get all the bits of the story in. So Chris and I originally met not only as classmates, we were both in business school doing our thing. And actually, were you an international business major? I feel like you were.
Most people do, but what they do not realize is I was rejected from that program.
Oh, wow. How many times? Just once? And you said that's enough?
Oh, fine. Oh, I can't be in your program. I don't need your school.
I feel you on that, bro. I feel you on that. Okay. So you weren't an international business major, but we were taking these foreign language classes. We were also teammates on, competing for men's track and field for the Gamecocks. So that was another way we kind of knew each other. And I want to ask about, in addition to maybe those more domestic trips with the team, was there anything that stood out to you when you traveled to, on your, playing clarinet or up to New York on the East Coast or with the team that said, hey, travel might be something for me? Because that there are a lot of people, especially I feel like from South Carolina or from some more rural regions, that never leave. They don't go anywhere, not even to North Carolina. To Scarowinds, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% right. And I think having parents that weren't from the South was a great introduction to that. So
right.
When we would learn things in school, or you hear how certain people feel about certain issues, you realize that you're getting the Southern perspective. But I knew my parents didn't necessarily feel that way. And go up north to meet family, you got to see different perspectives. And I think that was the beginning. And so I thought, man, if that's how it is, just up and down one coast of the country, how different is it in other parts of the country? And then imagine in other parts of the world. And I realized the world's really big, and I kind of wanted to go see it.
Wow, that's actually really wise, I think, and really keen of you to recognize that, to say, hey, if just this little slice could be so different than what I grew up from, imagine this played out across the world. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's worked. And definitely with the more and more time that I spend outside of the country, the more I have an appreciation for people that are different, that we don't all have to think the same, and that those perspectives are not as much of a wedge to divide us, but something that can unite us and across our differences and our common interests.
100%. So I definitely I'm curious on how young were you when you started going up to New York? Because I mean, y'all, believe it or not, I don't know if you ever spent time in South Carolina, but people are afraid to go to New York. Have you heard about this, Chris?
Oh yeah. I mean, my mom's a social worker down in South Carolina, has been most of my life. But she, even as young as 8, 9 years old, I can remember her telling, making it a point that we would travel a little bit or go see things, because she would tell me about the kids that didn't have the opportunity to do that, that literally had not been from one side of Columbia to the other, and not the neighborhood. So, I really tried to cherish and value those things. But to answer your question, probably that young, about 8 or 9 years old, I can remember being young. We used to go to you can probably appreciate this, FAO Schwartz up in New York. That was that was the place, and go play on the big piano and hang out in Legoland. But you never always got the Mega Blocks.
Right. No Legos, Mega Blocks. Hey, less of a choking hazard, right?
Well, that's right.
I love it. And that's a real deal. And I hope some people can relate to that. It's just depending on where you're from and kind of how open they are. You got everything you need in a nice Southern area. You got the Southern hospitality. You have great barbecue. South Carolina introduced me to what brisket really is. And I'm telling you, like, I'm disappointed by Texas barbecue. It's mostly miss.
Tell them about the brisket.
Man, listen, it might have been my freshman year. I went out to accompany somebody on a recruiting trip. We took them to a football game, and they took us up to the stadium. And well, y'all, when I tell you this brisket cut better than butter, it was like it was like whipped butter. You just put a spoon and you got a whole scoop of meaty, fatty, seasoned goodness. And I've been a changed man ever since.
But that's true. But the thing that I wish my Southern brethren would understand is that you can't have that for every meal.
100%. But I mean, there are a lot of good reasons to stay home. It's what you know. It's familiar. You have friends and family there. But you know, there's sometimes a fear in between the South and the North. You know, New York is too busy for me, or Northerners, as I can lament, when we come down south, it's too slow. How do things ever get done here? So, you know, the United States is so big and so diverse and has such a deep history regionally that these things can be real barriers from just traveling from state to state.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think as human beings, we kind of have this innate desire to kind of stay with what's familiar and what's comfortable, but you kind of have to push yourself and stretch yourself a little bit to try and explore these things. Otherwise, your perspective and your life experience will always be limited. And not to say that there's anything wrong with, enjoying where you started, but you should at least be aware of what's out there so that way you can appreciate what you've got.
It's definitely a different approach, and you've taken that approach. So let's talk about China a little bit. What attracted you to go to Beijing in 2010? What was it about the culture? Why China out of all the places?
So, for all the Chinese government officials listening, the president.
All hail the benevolent leader who can do no wrong. Right? Is that how we start this? Because this is definitely censored in China. I'm kidding.
Probably. So talking, absolutely. But I got a scholarship from the Chinese government through the Confucius Institute to go study abroad in China for a summer back in 2010. And that's kind of was the linchpin, because while I wanted to go previously, I didn't have the funds to do it. So to do it on somebody else's dime was a great opportunity. And so that's what I did. I went and did that, and that was kind of cool because I was able to go with some of my classmates and kind of ease into it. And we got to travel around not only Beijing and see all the traditional things there, from the Summer Palace to Tiananmen Square to the Forbidden City, but we also went out of the city to a small town called Shaoxing that I think had a few million people. It's kind of funny they call that a small city.
Right. That's the entire metroplex of Colombia.
Right? Oh, for sure. Yeah, that would be more than double Colombia, actually. But you leave Shaoxing and then you go to Shanghai for a couple of days, and I enjoyed all of that. So I knew that at that point, and the reason why I was really interested in China in the first place was, as wanting to be a business major, we were doing these case studies and reading the Wall Street Journal, and you could see that China was experiencing, this was about 10 years ago, all this huge economic and financial growth. So I figured if I could do business and eventually practice law in both the United States and China, then hopefully that would lead to an interesting career. And that's been true so far.
100%. And that's bold of you to go do that. Our relationship from the United States with China has been a mixed bag for most of the 20th century, to say the least. Everything from, communist influences to, business practices and fair trade laws and sweatshops and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot we don't know about China. And even maybe scarier is the language, bro. You try to figure out what's going on over there. A lot of people in China read English. You look at anything that's in, in traditional Mandarin, and you're like, I have no idea what these squiggles and lines say.
Yeah, it's a huge competitive advantage that I think, China hasn't even fully realized yet, or even really tried to push that advantage yet. But the fact that, a lot of other countries want to access China, but in order to do so, they must speak Mandarin, versus, China being one of the top English-speaking countries in the world by sheer means that they have the ability to access a lot of Western markets, whereas Westerners have a much more limited ability to access Chinese markets. And that's not just because of Chinese governmental influence. That is certainly a factor, but it's because Westerners oftentimes lack the understanding of nuances of Chinese culture and especially the language skills. You know, there's this huge deficit of qualified professionals that speak high-level Mandarin.
100%. And the ones that do, though, they realize some excellent business opportunities. I'm sure you'll share that. I'm sure that's been a part of your experience. But let's talk about language a little bit, because we were in the same Chinese classes for 2 semesters, and languages might be a knack of mine. But how was approaching the Chinese language for you? Did you feel that school helped you? Was there anything that you were unsure or scared about or concerned about? What was that learning experience like for you in school?
I think I certainly appreciated it because it gave me at least a decent foundation, and that's still to this day, as it goes to my Chinese language and cultural ability. But I think going back to my previous point, I think that Western schools could do a little bit better, or would do well to think about the culture and language. For example, when Westerners, especially American schools, approach language a lot of the times, you know, your Spanish, your French, your German, they approach it from, okay, here's a vocabulary list, learn it, try and put together some sentences. You don't even really have to try and learn how to speak it that well. You know, basically it's just a memory game. Whereas Chinese, and really speaking Chinese at a high or even intermediate level, requires not only the knowledge of the words, but the memorization of the characters. You know, the fact that the sentence structures can be oftentimes opposite to what it is in English, and how to pronunciation is such a huge factor. And then the cultural influences as well. And I feel like that gets lost a lot, and was kind of muted in our classes at USC even. But yeah, I guess that'd be my biggest gripe, is that I think that we could do more to put it into context, because it's not a Western language and doesn't come from a Western tradition.
Right. And it doesn't have those Romanized roots in terms of, you know, the character system, and it's also a tonal language. So overall, and this is me sharing, you know, my experience with it, but Chinese, statistically by the numbers, y'all, is easier to learn than English.
That's true.
There are less characters, less words, less options. There's just a lot less to memorize. The sentence structure has no tense. It's different, but actually on paper, it's fundamentally easier. There are less words in Chinese than English. So a lot of people who are native English speakers really miss that and are intimidated. So do you have any tips or advice for somebody who could, you know, possibly learn Chinese one day? How would you start with Chinese? How would you recommend somebody start it if they were curious enough?
Well, so I know this will sound a bit contradictory, but I do think you would start with just trying to understand, you know, a few characters, you know, and it depends on what you're learning for. You know, if you're learning to one day be able to speak at a high level, then, you know, might need to start even slower than what I'm about to lay out. But I think if you want to just, you know, learn some survival Chinese, I would do what your Western classes have probably taught you, which is get a vocabulary list, learn some of the basic words, try to string together a few sentences, and that'll get you through.
Okay. So maybe some go-to phrases like, you know, an introduction. I think those are a really good place to start, or asking, what is this? Things like that.
Exactly that. But if you're looking to really be able to, at some point, use your Chinese for business, or to be able to speak at a higher level, then yeah, you need to, you know, no matter where you live in the country, no matter where you're listening to this podcast, even if you're other parts of the world, I'm sure that there's a decent sized, or at least a pocket of a Chinese culture somewhere near you. Mm-hmm. And try to identify them and find them, because as it would turn out, any culture, any society, they have children typically. And I would ask them, hey, you know, can I borrow some of the books or some of the tapes or videos that you use to teach children Chinese? Because what that will do is that'll make it very simple for you, you know, getting an ear for the language, starting with the components of the characters called radicals that are kind of like Latin stems, but they're the stems of the Chinese language. So once you really understand radicals, you can kind of, quote, sound your way through Chinese characters and understand what words mean without knowing exactly what the word is.
100%. And y'all, that's gospel right there. If we ever do something where we break down language learning, because I think out of all my guests, Chris, you probably have the highest proficiency ability in another language besides myself out of the people I've interviewed so far. And that's the exact approach I used to, you know, get my French down, was studying children's books, watching children's cartoons, and taking it from that, you know, kind of humbling yourself. And it was fun for me. I love cartoons. But dude, you're totally on point with that. I hope you guys are taking notes.
And then what is tougher, especially if you're an entrepreneurial guy like myself or Jerry, or you're just ambitious and you want to get a lot of stuff done. What can be tough is one, humbling yourself, but two, as with any skill, you have to respect what you're trying to do. You're gonna have to invest some time. You're gonna have to take some time away and really focus on learning the fundamentals of the language and memorizing putting some time for it is what I mean. Is that even if it's 30 minutes to an hour a day, and just do that consistently, you'll be surprised how much time you make. But it's not the kind of thing where you just listen to a couple of songs or a couple of tapes that you'll learn it. You really need to put some time aside.
Right, that's sweat equity, and I think that's part of the reason why you've had success the way you have. It's sweat equity. It's putting in the work. I'll tell y'all. Listen, Chris is a worker. I was a decathlete at USC. Chris was a thrower. 100% all throws, right, Chris? You weren't doing any. You weren't pole vaulting with me. I don't think you were high jumping either. All throws.
All throws. I would have snapped that pole, Jerry.
Chris was 100% dedicated to the throws, but the progress he made from year 1 to year 4. I competed for 3 years. You were there all 4, correct?
Well, that's right. And to the point, for those listeners that may not be aware, I was what's called a preferred walk-on or recruited walk-on. And that means that you're not on scholarship, but you were definitely approached in high school about joining the team. So more or less you have to earn your scholarship if you're able to get one at one point, and you have to earn your ability to even travel. So I didn't travel my first 2 seasons. My second season I got injured, and that's what kept me out. But the third and fourth season that I had there, I was able to win my way onto the field, and that just takes a lot of time and effort.
100%. However, not all walk-ons, not all, scholarship people made it from season to season. I just remember, when you were talking about the work ethic in your Chinese, it instantly made me think of how hard you work your ass off at track and field and getting better at the throws. And your progress over 4 years was significant, was it not?
Well, it was, and without deterring the podcast too much, you took somebody, as I mentioned, I was a clarinet player. I was in a marching band, hadn't really touched a weight at all until I got to college, and I'm throwing against folks that have been playing football and lifting a lot of weights. To someone that knows their way around. By my 4th year, someone that knows their way around the weight room. It really understands the physics of throwing and how to move weight.
100%, and it was work ethic. And don't worry about derailing the podcast, because we just bullshit. We just talk about whatever. But that's important. Like, people need to understand that some of these qualities that allow you to be successful, if they see you and emulate and have a desire to emulate the success you've had, that work ethic is a consistent theme around your life. It's not just a one-time event.
Well, and to that point too, I would definitely tip my hat to you. You've heaped the praise on me, Jerry, but I certainly recall, not only on the track, but all the things that you were doing around class, both in class and then also just on campus. Being in a band, starting your entrepreneurial endeavors up. I certainly remember being like, "Dang, how did Jerry fit all this stuff into one day?"
Well, that's why I slept during class, because it was more efficient. But thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I did a lot of sleeping in college, y'all. A lot of sitting in the front row and sleeping. But let's jump back into China. So what was the most shocking thing when you showed up to Beijing in 2010? What sparked your curiosity to say, I have to come back here?
Well, so I think that's 2 different points. The first one, the most shocking thing is that, you might travel abroad. A lot of places you go, especially industrialized places, will have at least some level of English or English signage or people to help you out to speak English when you get there. I will tell you, as recently as 2010, if you landed in the Beijing airport and didn't speak any English, I hope you had a friend to help you out, or you got the address of where you're trying to go, because you get into the Beijing taxi and that guy's looking at you and you're looking at him, and if you don't speak any Chinese, you're not getting anywhere. So that was probably the most shocking thing right off the rip. And I think the thing that made me want to come back is just, I think kind of something that probably speaks to you, is that like the level of the entrepreneur spirit that was there, that you could see opportunity around every corner, from business opportunities to professional development to language learning to just meeting new people. Literally almost everything you did in the city kind of gave you this feeling of excitement and energy.
Wow. And you wanted to be a part of it so much, and that you kind of created a career around it.
Yeah, yeah. So this is not, the typical law school advice. I did my entire third year of law school at a Chinese law school. The program was taught in English, but it was at a premier Chinese university, Tsinghua University, in Beijing in the Northwestern District, called Wudako. And yeah, I did my entire last year there, and I was able to for a couple of different Chinese law firms, and somewhat starting to get a reputation as a Chinese business and legal practice kind of expert. So I've been doing that the last 4 to 5 years, and yeah, it was a gamble that paid off. We'll call it
All right, we like when we can call those big bets. That's what's up. That's what's up. So let's talk about working professionally. So you actually worked in China, right?
that. Yeah. I worked for two different Chinese law firms. One firm was a boutique firm that specialized in cross-border transactions and financial work in China. And it was one of the founders was my mergers and acquisitions professor, who was one of the creators of the Chinese Investment Council, which is an arm of the Chinese government that purchases foreign currencies
Okay.
for, basically leveraging those currencies against their home nations. And he and I hit it off well, and he ended up giving me an internship at his firm, and I was doing lots of complex contract clause drafting, to protect Western investors against share dilution in their stocks and the transactions, advising and doing due diligence on American law for some of the Chinese clients that we had. So that was really fascinating, and not so much there, but certainly in my second job, which was another premier Chinese firm. That was all cross-border mergers, acquisitions, and international arbitration. And whenever we would meet with Western clients, they would always, trounce me out, the one Westerner that we had on the team, to say, oh, this is, with American lawyer that we have. And I had to remind them, guys, I'm still a student. I'm getting ready to take the bar. I haven't taken it yet.
Right. I'm sure between those guys and maybe an auntie or two, when you really have that proud family member that's like, oh, he's a doctor, he's a lawyer, and you're like, whoa, wait a second, this isn't certified yet, right?
Exactly that. But it was kind of, yeah. I mean, anytime that our team was dealing with a Western client, they would involve me even if I wasn't working directly on the matter, just to kind of bridge the gap and hopefully pick up on cultural things that the Chinese speakers may miss.
Wow. What's one of the biggest cultural misunderstandings that Westerners generally have about the Chinese, or let's say mainland China, because there are some extensions?
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's a good point to make. The difference between mainland Chinese versus Hong Kongers versus Taiwanese. Those can be huge differences. But I think, and I think this can be expounded to a lot of different lessons. I think the biggest difference, or the biggest thing I'd like people to understand about Chinese culture, is that element of basic trust, and that kind of exudes through a number of things, through the idea of guanxi, or face, which is basically you don't embarrass, even if it's an adversary or someone that you don't get along with, you don't embarrass somebody publicly. That is the biggest sin that you can commit against somebody, and something that when you do that, you're pretty much burning that bridge with that person forever. And it's just dangerous because a lot of people in Chinese culture and society tend to know each other. And that sort of transgression can come back to you in other ways. But that basic principle of trust and it's something that extends to a lot of different things. From there to a lot of times Westerners will get frustrated that a Chinese party won't do business with them, but that's because they don't trust you yet. And you've got to figure out a way to bridge that gap.
Okay. So how do you think that this element kind of empowers the business culture and success that China's had? Have you seen direct ways that's been influential?
Absolutely. If you've got a Westerner that understands these sorts of dynamics, then you can have a conversation, or you can talk to the people in the right way in order to get what you're trying to achieve. Because Chinese people are perceptive. They know they may understand perfectly what you want or what you're asking about, but if you don't ask the right way, then you won't get any further as if you were a stranger. And a lot of times Westerners try to do that, to try and force their agenda without putting in the proper face time and relationship time. To that point, Jerry, I will mention to you and your listeners, I don't know when this will be posted, but September 24th this year is the Fall Festival, which is one of the biggest celebrations in China. So if you have any Chinese friends, you want to get them a moon cake and send them their way for the fall festival.
What, bro? That is a major key alert. Hashtag mooncake. Hashtag fall festival. Y'all, man, see, that's the sort of stuff that makes all the difference, bro. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll tell this anecdote because I don't think the person can be identified. But back in January, I was speaking at a conference for the American Bar Association on doing business in China in D.C., and a partner from a pretty large firm came and asked me afterwards, he's having this issue getting a Chinese party to sign a retainer. And I asked him some basic questions. When's the last time you met them? Have you been over there? How much time have you spent there? And then, at first I was thinking, just tell him, go spend some more time over there and play that game. But then I said, okay, well, maybe you can start it this way. What are you getting them for Chinese New Year? It was January at the time, and Chinese New Year was a couple weeks away. And he says with me with a 100% straight face, do you think I should get him something?
Right.
And it's just these, it's these things that, will they break a deal for you? Probably not. But, on awareness of it can make all the difference.
Wow, 100%. 100%. And as you predicted when you were coming up as a student, China's a major economic player. The fact that you can have this perspective and explain it to us in English in a way that we understand is huge, man. We can't take that for granted because there aren't many of us out there, and especially not many men of color out there. And let's talk about that a bit. Did you notice any differences? Did you notice anything that challenged or expanded your identity while you were out there in China?
Well, sure. In 2010, when I first went, keep in mind, this is 2 years after the Olympic Games were there in 2008. But still at that point, many Chinese people had not met many Black people, African or otherwise. And so, when I'm walking around campus, when I'm taking the subway, getting in cabs, people are just staring at me and taking pictures and, wanting to take pictures with me because they hadn't seen Black people before.
Right.
And so that was a little bit jarring at first because that's certainly the first time I've been somewhere where folks hadn't seen Black people before. And that was kind of intense. And then both in 2010 and this carried over even in 2014, I knew that, if I'm wearing a sweatsuit and carrying any kind of ball, people think I'm a real athlete. like I'm Kobe or something. And then, people would ask me for my autograph and I'm like, guys, I just throw the discus. I don't know what to tell you.
Right. It's kind of like a plate, but really heavy. It's okay.
And you'll get a kick out of this too, Jerry. I actually hold the shot put record at Tsinghua University.
Hell yeah, damn right. Listen, man, get all them records. I don't care how. That's what's up.
But to finish answering your question, Chinese people a lot of times, because they don't understand and haven't met Black people and don't know some of these social cues, they'll say things to you or ask you about things that they don't understand and maybe might be a little bit tone deaf if it was done in the West. For example, because they're only reference point at the movies and television. So they'll ask me all the time if I want to go play basketball, and that's a popular thing in China. So, that's not 100%, just because I'm a Black male, but, that's certainly a portion of it. Or if we go to karaoke, which is another popular thing, they always ask me if I want to sing Michael Jackson or
Right.
or if I want to do a rap song. And it's kind of like, nah, guys, like I'm a terrible rapper,
Right. Right. It's Chris Campbell, not Kendrick Lamar. What's going on here?
Exactly. And so things that, if the white guy or somebody came and asked me about that here in America, I might be getting a little like, whoa, calm down, man. You don't know me like that. But,
right.
In China, you understand the cultural difference.
And the reasonable lack of understanding because of, the demographics.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I was in it's funny you should mention this. I was in Best Buy yesterday. And I was looking at one of these Google Home products, and the guy was like, "You like hip hop, right?" And I was just like, "Eric, if they'll get this goddamn demo over, just play the song." like, And another thing, so you have a very, I feel, generous nature. You're a kind person, Chris, more kind than I am. What are some ways that you're able to kind of because not everybody that is Black or of color in China or Asian countries has a good experience, and some people take it really personally. Do you have any pieces of advice to share in terms of just, hey, I know you have this gut reaction because you're from New York or you're from Cal, you're from the States. How can people give themselves an extra second to say, wait a second, things are just different here, and I can maybe make this even a learning opportunity?
Well, so, and I'll tell you this, and I guess, let me, I love China. I love my experience in China. I think it's a great place to be, especially for, young Black folks that are trying to, make their next move or figure out a way to get ahead. But, all of my positive experiences in China don't outweigh the couple of negative experiences that I had as it goes to race. In that, there have been a couple of times where I was denied entry to a nightclub because basically they just thought I was dressed too Black or too urban or whatever. And, white guys or, Asian guys walking by wearing the same exact thing were allowed in. But, those were negative experiences. And especially when, I'm able to talk to the bouncer in Chinese, and explain to him, like, what's your problem? Why are you not letting me in? So those types of things happen. And, to your point, how do you calm yourself down and not fly off the handle? I think the biggest thing that you can do, especially if you're a hot-headed person, is kind of try and play mental chess with it. Remember those old Sherlock Holmes movies, with Robert Downey Jr., where he, would give these fight scenes and he would, predict how the fight was going to go and then make it happen. That's kind of what I do. Is I think, okay, I can, get loud and get rough with this guy, but that's still not going to get me in the nightclub. It's probably going to get me in worse trouble. Or, I can try and think of another way around it, or I can just let it go. And I think the best thing that you can do, simulate what's going to happen in your mind if you react the way that you want to react. And if it's anything less than an ideal circumstance for you, then don't do that.
100, spoken like a damn lawyer. That sounds amazing, dude. That is probably the most crisp and concise advice I could ever hope for. Thank you.
Hey, well, I don't trust those lawyers.
Right. But it's smart, man. That's emotional intelligence, man. That's respecting your energy and not spending it, frivolously. That's really smart. That's really smart, dude.
But I also recognize that sometimes that's easier said than done.
Right. And that's why you're a nice guy. You're nicer than me, man. Because, some people, I don't know. I think some people need to have a certain level of maturity before going into a country like that. And I think where things can be so oppositional if your attitude's not right or you're just not in the right mindset. You feel what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, the perspective I can add to the conversation now comes from someone that went to China where, though I might have been mature when I went, mature for my age, relatively speaking, I definitely grew up a lot more when you're in a foreign country where you're still learning the language and, there's no easy way out. It's not like I can just drive back to South Carolina when you're in the middle of Beijing.
Right. No, not this year. Maybe superhighway coming to a country near you, but you're right.
Knock on wood.
Right. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned not getting into clubs because going out and being downtown, I had my first experiences, out in Five Points in Colombia, on the weekends, partying a little bit in clubs. And that was a big deal, dress code for especially Black men, how you could dress to get in clubs. You couldn't wear plain tees because of gang affiliation, but you'd see a white guy walk in, no problem. And sometimes I think that's a powerful point to point out or to mention. I won't use the word point too many times because I think people have a hesitation for traveling. They say, oh, why would I spend the money to go out there and not get, treated the way I think I deserve it to be? And it's like, well, you could have the exact same experience in Columbia, South Carolina, so you might as well see something different.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I think exactly that. And I'm sure maybe you've heard just through myself or other folks in our timelines, that race issue as it comes to dress code has been a thing that's come up over the last couple of years, especially in Colombia, as the racial conversation nationwide has kind of shifted. So, once again, it is to some extent deciding, not letting the situation be dictated to you, but you deciding how it's going to play out. And I agree. If I can have that situation happen to me in Columbia, South Carolina versus Cuba, for example, or some other beautiful spot in the world, I'm much going to take the exotic locale.
Right, 100%, and you'll expand yourself just for going out there. I think is a great way to look at the flip side of that.
Mhm.
Because if you do nothing different, you're still gonna have the same experience. So you might as well just go do something different. Um, I think 100%. That's awesome. That's super awesome. There's so much I want to. You know what? Here's something maybe you might be able to shed some light on. What are some industries or some skill sets that are in demand in China? You mentioned it being a place that if you're kind of young and willing to put in the work with the language, that it's a place to make some moves from. And I believe that 100% from things I've heard, things I've read. What are some areas that people might be able to plug into quickly over in mainland China?
Well, let me say this. I think if you are an entrepreneur, someone that just wants to mix things up, you're unsatisfied with your life, even if you're not that wealthy, yeah, I would just drop my stuff and go to China, because if you can learn the language, it almost doesn't matter what you're interested in. If you're a Westerner that can speak Mandarin at a high level, Chinese people, Western people, there are tons of people that they'll throw money at you, first of all. Um, but secondly, I think is good as is good advice worldwide. The financial tech industry is kind of booming right now. If you can understand finance and apply that with some technical background, or you have a technical team that you can build, whether that be through mobile apps or software or something like that. Um, I think supply chain, that's always going to be in demand, because even with automation, if you have if you have the ability to show companies how to get their products from point A to point B faster, companies like Amazon, Apple, you name it, will continue to be in high demand for you, whether you're in China or anywhere. And there are tons of these Chinese companies through Alibaba, um, Baidu, and all these other companies that are based there that are looking for ways to get their products to Western markets. Uh, and then, yeah, I mean, the entertainment industry right now in China is getting ready to go through a shift as they try to kind of challenge Hollywood to a large extent in terms of the media and television and movies that they're producing.
Well, 100%. So all across the spectrum, there are opportunities.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, those would be, if I had three things to look into just off the rip, those three things I would immediately pay some attention to.
Okay, let me throw out a classic one for you. How about teaching English in China? How is that market looking?
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. So if you are somebody that, you're kind of doing something here, but you're not super satisfied with it, and you're looking for an adventure, yeah, go do that. There are tons of companies and organizations that you can hit up that will fund your fund you moving to China or Japan or another country you're interested in, to learn the language there and to teach at the same time. And they will put you in probably a decent sized department, pay you a respectable wage for wherever you are. Um, and they'll probably contract you to do that for at least a year. And I will tell you, this article made its round about 2 years ago, but I keep it kind of logged away. But there was a girl that was in Beijing around the time I was there, who was making six figures off of just teaching English in China, between teaching and having side clients and everything.
What? Six American figures? No way.
American figures, yeah, yeah, yeah.
The ones with the U.S. presidents? That's what's up, bro.
Right.
The opportunity is out there, bro.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. But to the point where we started this whole conversation, if you've never left, if you've never even considered a life or a career outside of where you're from or the United States, you don't even think about those opportunities. You don't even realize them. And the stat that kind of blows my mind, Jerry, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what continues to drive me to be in other places as much as I can, is that the entirety of the United States population is only 5% of the world population.
Right.
5%. And so you got 95% of the world out there that is, wants to meet you, wants to see what you're about.
Right. And man, that's really that makes you feel in a small place real quick. Because for us, we're US centric. We kind of think things revolve around us, and whether or not that's true is the attitude we have, and we take it when we travel. But you're right, 5%. That means 95% of things on this planet we are naturally foreign to.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. So we talked a lot about China, but I do want to ask about one more thing. How did you feel about how did were you able to sense the media presence and influence that the U.S. has while you were abroad?
Yeah, absolutely. So I could speak to that from both being in China and in Europe. In Europe, it's a lot more similar to your access to American media is not restricted, but the media coverage is a little bit different in that it's a lot more there's a lot less spin on the individual stories.
Mm.
You know, they're more mere facts. You know, Chris and Jerry were talking. That's it. You know, it doesn't say Chris and Jerry conspired on the phone.
Right.
You know, sometimes what a lot of American media might do. And in China, they will show you American media to the extent that it doesn't conflict with Chinese interest. And as you and a lot of your listeners are probably aware, there's this huge censorship issue that goes on in China where they censor stories that are unflattering to the Chinese government.
Right. And does that include entertainment media like movies and shows and maybe even, cartoons or books?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Anything from movies that have Chinese money having to be rewritten, and stories, whole stories, story points change so they can fit Chinese televisions, or scenes cut. Those types of things happen. You have a pretty tacit awareness that when you're using any sort of internet in China, that you're being monitored one way or another, even if you've got a VPN, which is a virtual private network. It's a way of accessing the Western websites while you're in China, that if you make enough waves, that the Chinese government will shut you down. That it does kind of feel like somebody's watching you when you're there.
Right. And that's the reality of it. But that's good to know, because we do have a very influential media. And like you mentioned, people are making assumptions about you just off of the images they've seen. That's really powerful, because when it comes to the reality, very few of us are professional athletes.
Well, that's true. That's very true. And I'll tell you one little anecdote that is kind of just illustrative of how powerful that effect can be. The rest of the world, in particular, understands what happened at Tiananmen Square back in 1989 as this huge human rights issue and this travesty committed upon the Chinese people that were protesting there. And there were Chinese students that I met in my classes that had no idea what I was talking about, that they understood it to be a peaceful protest, and then there were no casualties in that event.
Wow. And for those of you who might not be intimately familiar with Tiananmen Square, you'll see a lot of images of a young Chinese man standing in front of a tank. That's a classic scene from Tiananmen, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the fact that the Chinese students that were camped there, a lot of them, not a lot of, but more than a handful, were killed in that protest. Including that individual that was staring down the tank. It's not as if it was a peaceful protest and no one was upset and all these things. So there was definitely some creative retelling of history by some of the powers that be in China.
Right. Yeah. So it was an uprising. It was a protest that unfortunately became violent, and there's been some shift in narrative there. And another thing, not to get too woke on all this, we have some shifting of narrative that happens in the States too. So you guys check your facts, read more than one source of news, if that's what you do. Just things can be spun. If it can be done on a mass scale with millions and millions and millions. Oh, China has a population of over 1 billion now.
1.6.
Yeah, if it can be done to billions of people, trust me, this 350 million in the States ain't nothing. Sweet, man. Well, dude, thanks so much for sharing all of this great info about China. I appreciate it so much. I know there are very few with your skill set and expertise and cultural perspective, and I'm really proud of all the adventures I get to see you on. I've asked about China for years. I've been like, hey, what's going on here? What's going, just in case I want to make a move or do something like that. So I appreciate you being willing to share with everybody who follows the show.
Well, absolutely. And, keep asking about it. And I will tell you, even with my law practice here and good things that I've been able to do, my businesses that I have here, I plan to probably be back in China on a more permanent basis in the next decade.
Awesome, man. I'm looking forward to visiting. And speaking of your other ventures, let's talk about those things, because your exploration, your discovery, your curiosity does not stop with mainland China and your career as a lawyer. What else do you have going on? What else do we need to know about? What else is cooking?
All right. So I've got many interests, and we could spend probably a whole nother hour talking about all those other interests, but we'll keep it kind of condensed for now. And I'll talk about 4 projects that I've got upcoming. I'll give you the short version.
Let's do it.
The first is a venture that I run with another friend of yours, Jerry, and a former bandmate.
Former bandmate. Yep.
We run the Columbia Brew Bus, which is a beer tourism company here in Columbia, South Carolina, that takes folks around to get good craft beer all around the city. We've got close to 6. We got 6 right now, craft breweries that are open in the city, and with more coming each month. And if you want to find out more about that, that's at columbiabrewbus.com. Excuse me. That same business partner and I are actually starting another venture in the first quarter of 2019 called Feed Me. Now, Feed Me is an app. It's a food truck location app where you'll be able to find food trucks, your favorite food trucks, at no additional charge. And for the food trucks that opt into it, basically, when you're en route to the food truck, place your order, and when you get there, the food's ready.
Wow, because that's one of the biggest pains in the butt about food trucks is the wait.
Yeah, exactly that. And knowing where they are, especially if you're in a big city, we're starting on the East Coast of the United States first and hopefully go worldwide at some point. But, if you're in Prague or you're in Atlanta or New York, DC, maybe your favorite food truck is definitely out there, but where are
Right, 100%. That's awesome, dude.
And then the other 2 ventures in a nutshell, these are a little bit further down the pipeline. One is an axe throwing range that will be starting here in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Be basically throwing hand axes and, drinking some beer, but, being safe about it at the same time.
Well, if I hold my beer in a different hand than the axe, it's totally safe, right? That's good.
Well, that's right. You don't have to worry about any accidents.
Bro, hats off to you. Thank you with the – I miss this. This is great. Yes, 100%. Don't have to worry about any accidents.
And then the final venture that I'll leave your listeners with is a blog that myself and another lawyer are starting up that are both former athletes and guys that like to lift. And it's called Lawyers Who Lift. And that is a blog that is dedicated to helping our brethren in the practice of law learn how to take care of their bodies, eat right, and get swole.
Wow. Get them gains up, son.
That's right. It's never too early. Well, summer 2019 starts here.
That's what's up, dude. I didn't know you had – I knew about the Brew Bus because I was like – I mean, you guys have had write-ups about you. These guys – and Columbia has blown up for microbreweries since I left. There's 6 in the area and a few more coming, right?
Well, that's right. So there's 6 here right now. And, we're expecting – there's a few that are opening up in the suburbs of the Columbia area in Irmo and Chapin and West Columbia. But, yeah, I mean, Columbia is starting to get a little bit of a brew culture.
That's what's up. And the Feed Me app, that's new. The axe throwing range, that's a national. That's the thing that's sweeping the nation, along with food trucks. And the blog, I mean, to combine fitness and that corporate professional perspective, dude, I'm impressed. And I think the really cool thing and the huge value that you have in Columbia is like I mentioned in the beginning, not a lot of people leave. Not a lot of people leave the state of South Carolina in general. But the fact that you have left, decided to come back and give it a try to do all these different ventures that is going to expose people to different aspects of culture and just different experiences that aren't natively around Columbia. Like, it's not Los Angeles,
Well, that's right. And, I think it starts with having that conversation and exposing people a little bit at a time. And really, and I guess if there's a final point I'd like to leave is that there's this idea of flourishing where you're planted. So while I have lived and worked on several different continents and plan to do so again, right now I'm back home, back in Columbia. And, you could take the approach of like, I'm just going to stay to myself and, just work on my own stuff and not really get back to the community in any way. But, I think that'd be doing everyone a disservice, myself and the community included. So whether it's here or back in Europe, in Portugal or back in China, I want to leave an impact on every place I go.
That's really awesome, man. And it's needed. It is definitely needed. And people don't even realize how much it is needed there. So shout out to you for reinvesting all that experience to the place that you really love that place. You love that you're from Irmo. You love Columbia, South Carolina. You love the Gamecocks. You're the perfect man for the job.
Well, I appreciate that. And I've got a question for you, Jerry. When are we getting you back here in Soda City?
Oh, boy. That's a great question. I am overdue for a trip to Greenville, and Columbia is right next door. I'm working through some things right now. We will definitely touch base, but hopefully not before long. There's a lot of people I haven't seen in a while, and life changes, and I've learned the value of keeping up with people while you're still able to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on the show, Jerry. I appreciate you giving me this platform to address the kind people that listen to your podcast. And I'll have to chat with you about doing a podcast sometime. I might be interested in doing that myself.
100%, man. I'm here to help. Actually, what'll help with the with getting to Columbia? When is it too cold to ride the brew bus? And can I bring gin?
One, of course, you can bring gin, and two, with South Carolina, it's never too cold to ride.
100%, 100%. Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to keeping in touch. I'm enthused. Like I said, I had a late night last night, but every time I do one of these shows, I just get filled with so much energy because that's what you're sharing is positive energy, dude. So thank you so much, dude. I'm proud of you, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch and partying in China one day.
Absolutely. Hey, Jerry, appreciate your time.
Talk to you later. Ciao. Thank you.
All right, bye.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chris Campbell out here dropping major knowledge darts out here for the culture. Thank you so much for being on the show, bro. Like I said before, I'm just impressed with how much you've accomplished, how much you're into. Oh, he's got 4 different ventures he's trying to pop off with before 2019. Like, that's a big deal. So make sure you check him out on Instagram, Team Like the Soup. Definitely check out the Columbia Brew Bus at columbiabrewbus.com. I know they're doing great things. I know his other business partner as well. All great guys putting together quality, interesting things for the city of Columbia. And for those of you guys who might not know, the Chinese government is trying to get more tourists to come over, especially American tourists. So flights are pretty affordable going over there, between $400 and maybe $600 if you get a decent deal. And hopefully you can use this show as a point of reference for some of what to expect or how to navigate a little bit when you get to China. If not, hit up Instagram and find Chris. He'll be out there. So this has been another great session here at Point Noir. So glad you guys were able to join us. We'll see you next week with another amazing guest, another amazing session. And this is Jerry the Third, aka Kimono Jack, signing off.